The boarding gate was already crowded when it happened. People stood in loose lines beneath the bright screens flashing "boarding soon." The smell of coffee drifted from somewhere behind me, and the steady murmur of travelers filled the terminal. Suitcases rolled across polished floors. Someone nearby laughed too loudly. And then my daughter's voice cut through the noise. "You're flying economy," Olivia said, adjusting the strap of her designer handbag as if the sentence were nothing more than a routine travel detail. "Ethan and I are in business class. I don't want you sitting with us." For a moment, the words didn't quite land. They hovered in the air between us like something misplaced. A man standing behind me shifted awkwardly. The woman at the gate counter glanced up from her computer screen. Even the teenage boy in line ahead of us stopped scrolling on his phone. Olivia didn't seem to notice. She was too busy smoothing the sleeve of her coat and checking her reflection in the dark glass of the window beside the gate. Ethan stood next to her, one hand resting casually on the handle of their expensive suitcase, staring straight ahead like a man waiting for an elevator. "Business class boarding will start in a moment," the gate agent announced over the speaker. Olivia smiled faintly at that. Then she looked back at me, her expression tightening just slightly. "So it'll be easier if you board with your group," she added. "You know, economy." Behind us, someone cleared their throat. The moment stretched long enough that I could feel several pairs of eyes on my back, strangers witnessing a private humiliation they had never asked to see. And yet I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask why. Instead, I simply nodded once and stepped out of the line. The quietness of my reaction seemed to surprise her more than anger would have. Olivia blinked as if waiting for something, perhaps a protest or a wounded remark. When none came, she shrugged slightly and turned back toward Ethan. Neither of them noticed the small detail that had suddenly become very important. They didn't notice that I was the only one standing there who knew something they didn't, something that would change everything that followed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Karen Hollister, and I'm 67 years old. Before we continue, if you enjoy real family stories like this, take a moment to subscribe and tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me explain how a quiet morning at an airport turned into the moment I finally began to see my family clearly. The trip had been Olivia's idea. "Mom, we should all go to Colorado together," she had said over the phone a few weeks earlier. "The kids have never seen the mountains in winter. It'll be special." Her voice had sounded warm then, almost nostalgic. I hadn't taken a real vacation in years, so I agreed. It felt like a rare chance to spend time with my grandchildren Lily and Noah, who were growing faster than I could keep up with. Olivia handled all the arrangements. Hotels, flights, rental car, everything. "Don't worry about anything," she told me. "I'll take care of it." And I believed her. That morning at Portland International Airport, the terminal had been alive with the restless energy that airports always carry. Families juggling backpacks, business travelers glued to their phones, children dragging stuffed animals across the floor. Lily and Noah had been excited, bouncing on their toes as they waited near the window. "Grandma, look," Noah said, pointing at a plane taxiing slowly across the runway. Lily had slipped her hand into mine for a moment. "Are we really staying in a mountain lodge?" she asked. "That's what your mother tells me," I said with a smile. For a little while, it felt like the kind of family trip people remember years later. But then boarding groups began to appear on the screen. Group 1 business class. Olivia stepped forward immediately. Ethan followed, adjusting his jacket. That's when she turned back toward me and delivered the sentence that froze the air around us. "You're flying economy." She said it lightly, almost casually, like it was a small inconvenience rather than something humiliating. "I don't want you sitting with us." The strange thing was not the words themselves, it was the assumption behind them, the quiet certainty that this arrangement was perfectly normal. Around us, the line moved forward. Passengers began presenting their boarding passes to the gate agent. I stepped aside, letting Olivia and Ethan move ahead. Lily looked confused for a moment. "Grandma, aren't you coming with us?" she asked. "Just a different route, sweetheart," I said gently. Olivia was already walking toward the jet bridge. Ethan followed without looking back. The gate agent scanned their boarding passes. "Enjoy your flight," she said. Then she turned to me. "And you, ma'am?" I handed her my pass. Her eyes flicked briefly over the screen. For a moment, her expression shifted. Just slightly. Almost as if something about the situation didn't add up. But she said nothing. The scanner beeped softly. I stepped forward toward the jet bridge, the low hum of the airplane waiting at the end of the tunnel. Behind me, the terminal noise faded. Ahead of me, Olivia and Ethan were already walking down the narrow corridor, talking quietly to each other. They still didn't know. They didn't know that the seats they were so proud of, the wide leather chairs in business class, the extra legroom, the champagne service waiting on board, had all been paid for by the same person they had just told to sit somewhere else. Me. The jet bridge smelled faintly of metal and recycled air, the quiet hum of the aircraft growing louder as I walked toward the cabin door. Ahead of me, Olivia and Ethan had already disappeared into the front section of the plane. Business class. I watched them for a moment as they turned left after stepping through the doorway, their voices fading into the comfortable hush of that part of the cabin. The flight attendant greeted them warmly, her tone polished and attentive in a way that airlines reserve for certain passengers. Then she looked at me. "Welcome aboard." Her smile was polite, professional, the kind that reveals nothing. "Straight back, ma'am," she added gently, gesturing toward the aisle that led deeper into the aircraft. I nodded and continued walking. The plane was nearly full already. Overhead, bins were open, travelers shifting luggage and settling into seats. The cabin lights glowed softly above rows of narrow seats that seemed even tighter once you started walking between them. Row 12, row 18, row 24. My boarding pass said 32A window seat, near the back. I slid into the narrow space, placing my purse beneath the seat in front of me. The fabric of the seat felt thinner than I remembered from the last time I had flown. Around me, strangers arranged pillows, opened books, and checked their phones. A man across the aisle was already asleep. Somewhere toward the front of the plane, I could hear the faint clink of glassware being prepared, business class service beginning. For a moment, I simply sat there. The steady rhythm of passengers boarding continued down the aisle. A couple squeezed past me, apologizing quietly as they tried to reach their row. It wasn't the first time I had flown economy while someone else traveled more comfortably. But something about the moment at the gate kept replaying in my mind. "You're flying economy. I don't want you sitting with us." The words themselves were strange enough, but it was the tone that lingered, not apologetic, not even embarrassed, just certain, as if the arrangement had always been that way. I stared out the small oval window beside me. The wing stretched across the tarmac under a pale Oregon sky-ground cruise moving around it in careful choreography. A strange thought crept in quietly. When Olivia had planned the trip, she had told me not to worry about the details. I'll take care of everything, she had said, and I had believed her. I trusted my daughter, yet now, sitting there in seat 32, something about the situation didn't feel right. It wasn't jealousy. At 67, I had long stopped caring about which part of an airplane I sat in, but the moment itself felt off. I reached into my purse and took out my phone. The screen lit softly in my hand. For a few seconds, I simply held it there. Then I opened my banking app. The signal inside the plane was weak, but still functional while passengers were boarding. The loading circle spun slowly before the account summary appeared. My savings account looked exactly as it had the day before. My checking account, too. Nothing unusual. Still, the thought remained. Olivia had booked the flights. She had told me everything was arranged. But I had a habit one developed over decades of balancing budgets and managing household finances of double-checking things, especially when something felt wrong. My thumb scrolled through the most recent transactions, groceries, utilities, a bookstore purchase from the previous weekend, normal things, the kind of quiet financial rhythm that had shaped my life for years. Another memory surfaced. A few weeks earlier, Olivia had called about the trip. "Mom, the airline deal we were looking at fell through," she had said casually. "The company promotion Ethan was hoping to use didn't work out. I hadn't thought much about it at the time. Things happen. But the flights are still available," she had continued. "They just need to be paid now before the prices go up." I remembered standing in my kitchen, the late afternoon sunlight falling across the counter while we talked. "How much are they?" I had asked. "Don't worry about the details," she said quickly. "It's easier if you just transfer the money and I'll handle the booking." At the time, the request hadn't seemed unusual. Families help each other, especially mothers. Now sitting quietly in row 32A while the plane filled with passengers, that conversation replayed itself with new clarity. I opened the transaction history again. Scrolling slowly, there it was, a transfer. Large enough to stand out, dated just 3 weeks earlier. The description simply read, "Online transfer Carter household." My eyes lingered on the amount. The number itself didn't alarm me. Over the past year or so, there had been several occasions when Olivia needed help with something repairs, school activities for the kids' unexpected expenses. I had always helped when I could, but something about the pattern now felt different. Maybe it was the silence from the front of the plane. Maybe it was the memory of Olivia's calm voice telling me I should sit somewhere else. I opened the transfer details. The amount confirmed what I already suspected. The money had come directly from my account. For the flights. The realization settled quietly in my chest, not like anger but like a slow rearranging of facts. The seats Olivia and Ethan were settling into right now, the ones where flight attendants would soon offer drinks and warm towels, had been paid for with my money. And yet somehow I was the one sitting in row 32A. The aircraft door closed with a dull thud. A flight attendant walked down the aisle, checking seatbelts and overhead bins. I looked down at my phone again. If this had been the only transfer, it might have remained a small curiosity. But suddenly, I found myself wondering about the others. Over the past year, there had been roof repairs for their house, braces for Lily, soccer academy fees for Noah, and something about a kitchen renovation Olivia had mentioned during one of our phone calls. Each time she had promised the same thing. "We'll pay you back soon, Mom." I had never pressed the issue, but now a quiet question formed in my mind. How much had there been altogether? My banking app only showed a few recent transactions on the main screen. If I wanted the full picture, I would need the complete history. The plane began to push slowly away from the gate. I opened the customer support tab in the app. After a moment, the bank's call option appeared. I hesitated briefly. Then I tapped it. A calm, automated voice greeted me before transferring the call to a representative. "Thank you for calling. How can I assist you today?" "Yes," I said softly, keeping my voice low so the passengers around me wouldn't overhear. "I'd like to request something." "Of course. I need the complete transaction history for my account." The woman paused. For what time period? I watched the runway lights sliding slowly past the window as the aircraft taxied toward departure. Then I answered. "I'd like the full record of transfers and withdrawals for the last 18 months. The mountains appeared slowly through the airplane window as we began our descent. Jagged white peaks rose above thick forests of pine, their slopes glowing softly under the winter sun. Even after all the years I had lived on the West Coast, there was something about the Rocky Mountains that made the world feel larger, quieter. For most of the flight I had said very little. Olivia and Ethan remained in the front cabin. I saw them only briefly as we disembarked standing near the jet bridge while the passengers from economy slowly filtered past. Olivia smiled as if nothing unusual had happened earlier. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, gesturing toward the mountains outside the airport windows. "It is," I replied. No one mentioned the moment at the gate. The drive to Vail Mountain Lodge took nearly an hour. Snow lined the roads in high banks, and the air seemed thinner, sharper than the mild winter back in Portland. The children were excited the entire way. "Look at that ski lift," Noah shouted from the back seat of the rental car. Lily pressed her face to the window, watching skiers glide down distant slopes. Olivia spent most of the drive scrolling through her phone. Ethan focused on the road. I watched the mountains. The bank had emailed the requested statement while we were still in the air. I had seen the notification appear briefly on my phone before the plane switched to airplane mode. I hadn't opened it yet. Something about the document waiting in my inbox felt heavier than a simple list of numbers. By the time we reached the lodge, evening shadows had begun to stretch across the snow. The building itself was beautiful in the way luxury mountain resorts often are: warm, wooden beams, tall windows, stone fireplaces large enough to walk into. The lobby smelled faintly of pine and burning cedar. "Welcome to Vale Mountain Lodge," the receptionist said cheerfully as we approached the desk. Olivia stepped forward to check in. Ethan stood beside her, one arm draped casually over the counter. Lily and Noah wandered toward a display of ski helmets and gloves near the entrance. I stood slightly behind them, taking in the quiet elegance of the place. The trip really had been well planned. Soon enough, we were handed our room keys. Olivia and Ethan's suite was on the 3rd floor. My room was down the hall, smaller but comfortable. "That way we're all close," Olivia said lightly as she handed me the key card. Her tone was warm again, almost affectionate. But something in me had shifted earlier that day at the airport, and that shift had not disappeared. After dinner, the family gathered briefly near the large stone fireplace in the lobby. Guests sat in soft leather chairs, sipping wine while snow fell gently outside the tall windows. Noah had fallen asleep halfway through the hot chocolate he insisted on ordering. Ethan carried him upstairs. Lily followed, dragging her small suitcase. Olivia lingered for a few minutes, talking about ski lessons for the kids the next morning. "You should rest tonight, Mom," she said before heading toward the elevators. "Tomorrow we'll be busy." "Good night," I replied. The lobby slowly emptied as the evening grew late. Eventually, I returned to my room. The quiet there felt deeper than the busy warmth downstairs. Snow brushed softly against the window as the mountain wind moved through the trees outside. I placed my purse on the small desk near the lamp and sat down. For a moment, I simply listened to the silence. Then I reached for my phone. The email from the bank was still there. Transaction history, request attached statement. My finger hovered over the attachment before opening it. The document loaded slowly, page by page. Lines of dates and descriptions appeared in neat rows. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Utilities, property taxes, grocery purchases, the ordinary financial rhythm of my life. Then the transfers began appearing. One near the top caught my attention immediately. Online transfer, Carter household. The amount matched the payment for the plane tickets. I scrolled further. Another transfer appeared just 2 months earlier. The note beside it read, "Roof replacement assistance." I remembered that call. Olivia had sounded stressed that day. The roof started leaking after the storm, she had said. Insurance isn't covering everything. I had sent the money without hesitation. A few lines down, another entry appeared. Orthodontic payment, Lily's braces. That conversation had happened during a Sunday afternoon call. "They're expensive," Mom Olivia had said apologetically. Of course I helped. Further down the page, another transfer. Youth Soccer Academy fees. Noah, I could almost hear Noah's excited voice from the last time he told me about his soccer practice. Then came the kitchen renovation. That one had been presented as an investment. It'll increase the value of the house, Olivia had explained. Each memory felt harmless when viewed alone. A roof, braces, children's activities. But the document laid them out in a long column of numbers. Transfer after transfer, month after month. I continued scrolling. Some were smaller, others were larger than I remembered. Every single one carried the same description. Carter household. My eyes moved slowly down the pages. By the time I reached the final line of the statement, the pattern was impossible to ignore. I leaned back slightly in the chair. The room felt unusually quiet again. Outside the window, snow continued falling across the mountains. I returned to the top of the document and began adding the numbers together carefully, one by one, transfer after transfer. The total grew faster than I expected. 10,000, 30, 70, over 100. I stopped once certain I had made a mistake. Then I recalculated. The final number settled on the screen with a calm certainty that made my chest tighten. Over the past 18 months, I had transferred exactly $220,000 to my daughter and her household. And until that moment, I had never realized it. For a long time, I simply stared at the number on the screen. $220,000. It didn't feel real at first. Numbers on a bank statement rarely do. They sit there calmly in neat columns, stripped of context, stripped of emotion. But behind each of those transfers was a memory, a phone call, a request, a promise that the money would only be temporary. I leaned back slowly in the chair, letting the quiet of the room settle around me again. Outside the window, the snow continued falling over the mountains, soft and endless. The lights from the ski lodge reflected against the glass like distant stars. My daughter had not taken the money all at once. That might have been easier to notice. Instead, it had come piece by piece. A roof repair, braces, soccer fees, a kitchen renovation, plane tickets. Each request wrapped in a small story. Each story believable on its own. And every time I had said yes, because that's what mothers do. I closed my eyes for a moment and tried to replay the conversations in my mind. Olivia had always sounded grateful. "Thank you, Mom. We'll pay you back soon. You're helping the kids more than you know." But as I sat there looking at the statement, something about those words began to feel different. Not false exactly, just practiced. The sound of a car passing slowly outside the lodge broke the silence. Somewhere down the hallway, a door closed softly. Life continued around me unchanged. Yet inside that quiet hotel room, something had shifted. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask a question I had never asked before. What if this wasn't temporary? What if Olivia had never intended to repay any of it? The thought didn't arrive as anger. It arrived as clarity. I opened the document again and began scrolling carefully through the pages. If I was going to understand what had happened, I needed to see everything clearly. Dates, amounts, descriptions. I took screenshots of the transfers one by one, saving them into a small folder on my phone. The action felt strangely methodical, almost like grading papers back when I was still teaching. Evidence. The words slipped into my mind without effort. Not because I was preparing for a confrontation, but because I suddenly realized how little control I actually had over my own finances. Over the past year and a half, the money had flowed steadily from my account into Olivia's household, yet every decision had been based on trust. Nothing had ever been written down, no repayment plan, no agreement, just a mother believing her daughter's promises. My phone buzzed quietly. A message from Olivia appeared on the screen. "Mom, we're going skiing tomorrow morning. Want to come with us?" For a moment, I stared at the message. The warmth in her words felt almost surreal compared to the numbers I had just finished calculating. I typed a short reply. Maybe later. "I'm a little tired tonight." The typing dots appeared for a moment. Then her response came. "Okay, get some rest." That was all. I placed the phone back on the desk and looked again at the bank statement. $220,000. I tried to imagine explaining that number to someone else, to a friend, to a financial advisor, even to Olivia herself. The number was large enough to change the course of someone's life, large enough that if something happened to me tomorrow, it would represent a significant part of everything I had worked for. Thomas and I had spent decades building our savings, carefully, patiently. He had always believed in planning ahead. Security isn't about how much you make, he used to say. It's about protecting what you have. After he passed away, I had tried to follow that philosophy. The money in my accounts wasn't meant to create luxury. It was meant to create stability, for retirement, for emergencies, for the kind of future where I would never have to depend on anyone else. Yet somehow, without fully realizing it, I had allowed someone else to begin depending on me, not occasionally, but systematically. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me thoughtful. Because the truth was, Olivia probably didn't see the situation the way I did. From her perspective, I was simply helping. Helping with the house, helping with the children, helping with opportunities she and Ethan might not otherwise afford. And perhaps in her mind, that help had slowly become something else, something expected. I folded my hands on the desk and looked out at the mountains again. For years, my instinct had always been the same. Protect the family. Give when they needed help. Avoid conflict whenever possible. But tonight, another instinct was beginning to rise quietly beside the old one. The instinct to protect myself, not through anger, not through accusations, through structure, through boundaries. I reached for my phone again and opened my contacts. There was a name there I hadn't spoken to in several months: Susan Miller. Susan had been one of my closest friends in college before life carried us in different directions. Over the years, we had stayed loosely in touch, and before she retired, she had spent decades working in the legal field, specifically mediating family disputes. I hesitated before calling. The time difference meant it was still early evening back in Oregon. She answered on the third ring. Karen Susan's voice sounded surprised but warm. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," I said gently. "I just needed some advice." There was a brief pause. Advice about what? I glanced down at the bank statement on the desk. "About protecting my finances," I said. Susan listened quietly as I explained the situation, not every detail, but enough to outline the pattern of transfers. When I finished, she was silent for several seconds. Then she asked one simple question. "Karen, have you ever considered setting up a trust?" The word lingered in the air between us. A trust. I had heard the term before, usually in conversations about estate planning or inheritance, but I had never seriously thought about it. "What would that do?" I asked. "It creates legal boundaries," Susan said calmly. "It allows you to define exactly how your assets are used and who controls them. In other words, protection. Not confrontation, not punishment, just protection." I thanked Susan for her time and ended the call a few minutes later. The room returned to silence again, but now the quiet felt different, more focused. I opened my notebook from my travel bag and wrote down a single sentence: a trust. Then beneath it, I added another thought that felt strangely steady as I wrote it. For the first time in a long while, I was going to make sure that my future and my finances remained in my own hands. I closed the notebook slowly, and in that quiet mountain lodge room, I made a decision. I was going to protect what belonged to me. The rest of the trip passed quietly on the surface. From the outside, nothing seemed different. Each morning in Vail followed the same peaceful rhythm. Snow gathered along the lodge balconies, the mountains glowed pale gold under the winter sun, and the children rushed toward the ski lifts with the endless energy only young people seem to possess. Lily learned quickly. By the second day, she was sliding down the beginner slopes with surprising confidence. Noah spent more time falling than skiing, but he laughed every time he landed in the snow. Olivia and Ethan looked happy, relaxed, like a family enjoying a well-earned vacation. And I joined them often enough to keep everything feeling normal. But something inside me had changed. I watched more carefully now. I listened differently when Olivia spoke about money, about the house in Greenwich, about future plans she and Ethan were considering. Little comments began to stand out. "Ethan thinks we might redo the upstairs bathroom next year. The kids' school tuition is going up again. Real estate in our area is getting crazy." None of these things sounded like emergencies. They sounded like the everyday concerns of people who were living comfortably. Yet each time she spoke about them, I noticed the same small pause afterward. The quiet expectation that perhaps eventually I might help again. By the time the trip ended and I returned home to Portland, my decision had settled into something calm and clear. I wasn't angry, and I wasn't planning any dramatic confrontation. I simply needed to put boundaries in place. A week after returning from Colorado, I scheduled an appointment. The office of Brooks Estate Planning Group sat on the 12th floor of a modern glass building overlooking the Willamette River. It was the kind of quiet professional space where everything from the polished wood reception desk to the soft lighting in the hallway seemed designed to make people feel organized and safe. A receptionist greeted me warmly and asked me to take a seat. "Ms. Brooks will be with you shortly." Through the window behind her desk, I could see the gray winter sky reflected in the river below. For years, financial decisions in my life had been simple: pay the bills, save what you can, help family when they need it. Now, for the first time, I was stepping into a different kind of conversation, one about structure, protection, control. "Mrs. Hollister." I turned to see a woman in her early 40s approaching with a calm, confident expression. "I'm Danielle Brooks. Thank you for coming in." Her office was spacious but understated. Law books lined one wall, and a large window overlooked the city skyline. She invited me to sit across from her desk. "How can I help you today?" she asked. I explained the situation carefully, not as a complaint, not as a family conflict, simply as a pattern of financial support that had grown larger than I intended. Danielle listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back slightly in her chair. "What you're describing is actually quite common," she said. "In what way?" I asked. "Many parents help their adult children financially," she explained. "The difficulty usually appears when those arrangements remain informal." Informal. The word felt accurate. For 18 months, everything had been based on trust alone. Danielle folded her hands together. "A living trust can help solve that problem," she continued. She explained it slowly, making sure I understood each step. A revocable living trust would allow my assets, my savings, my home, my investments to be placed inside a legal structure. The structure would define how the money could be used, who controlled it, and under what conditions it could be distributed. "You would remain in full control while you're alive," Danielle said, "but the trust ensures that no one else can influence or pressure those decisions." In other words, the boundaries I had been searching for. "And if someone tries," I asked. "The trust documentation speaks for you," she said calmly. "No arguments, no emotional pressure, just the law." The conversation lasted nearly an hour. We reviewed my accounts, my property, my long-term plans. At the end of the meeting, Danielle turned her computer screen slightly so I could see the document she had begun drafting. At the top of the page, a title appeared in bold letters: Hollister Family Living Trust. The name looked strangely official, more permanent than I had expected. "This trust keeps your financial decisions in your hands," Danielle said, "exactly where they belong." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said, "that's what I want." Over the next few days, the paperwork moved forward quickly. Documents were reviewed, assets were transferred into the trust structure, signatures were added where needed, and one quiet afternoon, about 2 weeks after our first meeting, Danielle called me. "The filing has been completed," she said. "The Hollister Family Living Trust is now officially recorded." I thanked her and ended the call. For a moment, I simply sat at my kitchen table looking out at the small garden behind the house Thomas and I had lived in for so many years. Nothing about the house looked different. The same trees, the same quiet street. But something important had changed. For the first time since that moment at the airport gate, I felt a sense of calm return. Not because I had taken something away from anyone, but because I had finally placed my future back into my own hands. And from that point forward, the rules surrounding my money were no longer invisible. They were written down, protected, and legally binding. For nearly 2 weeks after the trust was filed, nothing happened. Life moved forward in its usual quiet rhythm. Mornings in my Portland home were calm. I watered the plants near the kitchen window, read the newspaper at the small wooden table Thomas had built years ago, and walked through the neighborhood park when the rain allowed it. Olivia called a few times during that period. The conversation sounded normal. She talked about the children, about Noah's soccer practice, about Lily's upcoming school project. Ethan's work schedule kept him busy, she said, but they were managing. Nothing in her voice suggested that anything had changed, which is why the phone call that arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon felt so sudden. My phone rang just as I was finishing lunch. Olivia's name appeared on the screen. I answered. "Hi, Mom." Her voice sounded tight, not angry yet, but tense in a way I hadn't heard before. "Hi, Olivia," I said calmly. "Is everything all right?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then she spoke again. "Did something happen to your bank accounts?" The question arrived so abruptly that for a moment I didn't respond. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean," she said, her voice sharpening slightly. "Ethan tried to transfer the money for the kids' ski equipment today. The transaction didn't go through." Another pause. "And when we checked with the bank," she continued, "they said your account structure had changed." I leaned back in my chair. Outside the window, rain tapped gently against the glass. "Yes," I said quietly, "it has." Silence filled the line for several seconds. When Olivia spoke again, the warmth from earlier conversations had disappeared. "What did you do?" she asked. "I organized my finances," I replied. That's not what I'm asking, she said quickly. Her voice had shifted now, moving toward something sharper. Why would that affect us? The question hung in the air between us. Us. I chose my words carefully. Because the money is mine, Olivia. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her tone carried something new, not anger yet, something closer to disbelief. So you're saying we can't access anything now? You were never supposed to access it directly, I said gently. That's not what you told us before. I never said the money was permanent. The tension on the line thickened. I could almost picture her pacing through the kitchen of the house in Greenwich, phone pressed tightly to her ear. This is unbelievable, she said. Olivia? No, Mom, listen, she interrupted. Her voice rose slightly now. We've been planning things based on the help you promised, the kids' school, the house renovations, Ethan's financial planning. I didn't promise ongoing support, I said quietly. You helped us before. Yes, and now you just… What? Shut everything down. The frustration in her voice had begun to blend with something else, something sharper. You didn't even tell us, she added. I looked down at the notebook resting on my kitchen table, the same one where I had first written the word trust weeks earlier. I didn't think I needed to announce a personal financial decision, I said calmly. For a moment, Olivia didn't answer. Then she laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. You're acting strange, she said. The words landed gently, almost casually, yet the tone behind them felt deliberate. Strange, I repeated. Yes, she said quickly. This isn't like you. I said nothing. Her voice continued, now slower. You've always helped us, Mom. You've always wanted to support the family, and I still do. Then why would you suddenly make things complicated because things had already become complicated? But I didn't say that. Instead, I waited. And Olivia filled the silence. You know, she said carefully, Ethan and I were actually talking about this earlier. Something in the way she said that made my attention sharpen. Talking about about how different you've seemed lately. Different. The word hung between us. You've been forgetful sometimes, she continued. That happens to everyone. That's not what I mean. Her voice softened slightly. Too soft. Mom, have you talked to your doctor recently? The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. What are you suggesting I asked? I'm not suggesting anything, she said quickly. I'm just concerned. Concern. That was the word she chose. Yet the direction of the conversation was becoming clearer with every sentence. If something is affecting your judgment, she continued carefully, it might explain why you're making decisions that don't make sense. I sat quietly at the kitchen table listening. The rain outside had grown steadier now, running in thin streams down the window. Olivia, I said slowly, my judgment is fine. Are you sure? Yes. Well? She hesitated, then continued, because if there's a medical issue, there are ways families can help manage things like finances. There it was, the idea she had been circling, not quite stated directly, but close enough. A chill passed quietly through the room. If that moment surprised you as much as it surprised me, take a second to like the video so more people can hear stories like this. And I'd honestly like to know your reaction too. Have you ever heard someone twist a situation like that in the middle of a family conversation? On the other end of the phone, Olivia kept speaking. We're just worried about you, she said. I'm not worried about me, I replied calmly. Well, Ethan thinks we should at least look into it. Look into what? A professional evaluation, she said. The words landed softly, but the meaning behind them was sharp. You mean a mental competency test, I said. Another pause. Then Olivia answered, if that's what it takes to make sure everything is being handled responsibly. The call with Olivia ended without any real resolution. After she mentioned the professional evaluation, the conversation drifted into a tense silence neither of us seemed willing to break. Eventually, she said she had to pick up Noah from soccer practice. We'll talk again soon, she added. The line went dead. For a long time after that, I remained seated at the kitchen table, my phone resting quietly beside the notebook where the word trust had first been written. Outside, the rain slowed to a light drizzle. Portland afternoons often felt like that: gray skies, quiet streets, the steady rhythm of everyday life continuing no matter what happened inside the houses along them. But I knew the conversation with Olivia hadn't truly ended. It had simply paused. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. I was watering the small plant near the living room window when I heard it. The sound echoed through the house in a way that immediately felt different from the usual deliveries or neighborhood visits. When I opened the door, Olivia was standing on the porch. Ethan stood beside her. Behind them, Lily and Noah waited near the car in the driveway. For a brief second, no one spoke. The autumn air felt cold against my face. Mom, Olivia said finally. Her voice sounded composed, almost rehearsed. I thought we should talk in person. I stepped aside and opened the door wider. Come in. The four of them entered slowly, bringing the outside chill with them. Lily gave me a quick hug as she passed. Hi, Grandma. Noah followed, holding a soccer ball under one arm. Hey. They both moved toward the living room, settling onto the couch, without sensing the tension surrounding the adults. Olivia and Ethan remained standing near the kitchen doorway. For a moment, no one said anything. Then, Olivia crossed her arms. Why didn't you tell us you were changing everything? She asked. The question was direct, but her tone remained controlled. I motioned toward the chairs at the kitchen table. Let's sit down. Ethan sat first. Olivia followed reluctantly. I took the chair across from them. The same table where I had spent years grading homework assignments now felt like the center of something entirely different. You mentioned the trust on the phone, Olivia said. Yes, and the bank confirmed it when Ethan called. That's correct. Ethan leaned forward slightly. So everything is locked now. Everything is organized, I replied. That's not what I asked. The tension in the room tightened another degree. I folded my hands together on the table. My finances are now managed through the trust. And that means we can't access anything, Ethan said flatly. You were never meant to access it directly. Olivia exhaled sharply. Mom, this is ridiculous. I don't think it is. You've helped us for years. Yes, and now you suddenly act like we were doing something wrong. I never said that. Then what are you saying? I held her gaze. I'm saying the arrangement needed boundaries. The word seemed to irritate her. Boundaries, she repeated. Yes. Ethan shifted in his chair. You do realize we've made financial decisions based on the support you've been giving us. I'm aware of that. So what are we supposed to do now? He asked. The question carried frustration rather than curiosity. You'll manage your finances the way every other household does, I said calmly. Olivia shook her head slowly. This isn't just about money. No, you're pulling away from your own family. I'm protecting my finances. That's not the same thing. The conversation was no longer calm. Even the children in the living room seemed to sense something was wrong. Lily had stopped scrolling on her phone. Noah bounced his soccer ball lightly against the carpet. Olivia leaned forward suddenly. Do you have any idea what this does to us? Yes? You're putting us in a terrible position. I don't believe that's true. You cut off support overnight. I placed structure around it. That's the same thing. Her voice rose now. Ethan placed a hand on the table, trying to steady the conversation. Karen, he said carefully, maybe we should talk about this rationally. I am being rational. No, Olivia snapped, you're being stubborn. I looked at her quietly. I've supported you for years. And we're grateful for that, Ethan said quickly. But nothing. Olivia interrupted. Her composure was slipping now. This whole situation is completely unnecessary. I said nothing. The silence seemed to irritate her even more. You know what I think, she continued. I think someone put this idea in your head. No one did. That lawyer did. Danielle explained the options. The decision was mine. Mom, you don't even understand these things. I understand them perfectly well. Her chair scraped slightly against the floor as she leaned back. Do you hear yourself right now? Yes. You're isolating yourself. I'm protecting myself. From your own family. The question hung in the room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Olivia's expression changed. Something colder replaced the frustration. You know, she said slowly, Ethan and I talked to someone after our call the other day. I didn't respond. a family friend who works in legal services. Ethan looked uncomfortable but didn't interrupt. They explained something interesting, Olivia continued. What was that? That when older parents start making unusual financial decisions, families sometimes have to step in. The words landed carefully, measured, calculated. I kept my voice calm. What exactly are you implying? That if someone's judgment becomes questionable, she said there are legal ways to protect their assets. The phrase sounded eerily familiar. Legal ways. Protect their assets. You're talking about conservatorship, I said. Neither of them answered directly, but their silence confirmed enough. For a moment, the house felt impossibly quiet. Even the children had stopped moving in the other room. You would try to control my finances through the court, I said slowly. Olivia shrugged slightly. If it becomes necessary. Necessary for whom? For the family. The words hung between us like frost. I looked toward the living room. Lily was watching us now, her expression uncertain. Noah hugged his soccer ball against his chest. I turned back to Olivia. Do you realize what you're saying? Yes. And you think threatening me will change my mind? It's not a threat. What would you call it? Olivia stood up from the table. Her voice dropped into something colder than anger. Reality. She looked toward the living room where the children sat quietly. Then she turned back to me. And that was when she delivered the sentence that made the entire room go still. If you keep going down this path, Mom, she said slowly, you should understand something. Her eyes met mine. You'll never see the kids again. The silence after Olivia's words lingered long after the front door closed. I stood in the hallway for several seconds after they left, staring at the space where the children had been sitting only moments earlier. The house felt larger now, the quiet stretching into every corner. You'll never see the kids again. The sentence echoed in my mind, not as anger but as something colder. A calculation. That night I didn't sleep much. I sat at the kitchen table with the small desk lamp on, reviewing the notes I had written over the past few weeks, the bank transfers, the conversations, the trust documents Danielle had prepared. The situation had crossed a line, and Olivia knew it. The next morning I called Danielle Brooks. She answered immediately. Karen, I was expecting you might call. I told her what had happened the day before Olivia's visit, the conversation at the table, the mention of legal intervention. Danielle listened carefully, her tone calm and professional. When I finished, she asked a single question. Did they explicitly mention conservatorship? Yes. There was a brief pause on the line. That's serious, she said. It means they're considering a legal claim that you're incapable of managing your own finances. I'm aware of that. And are you prepared to challenge it? I am. Good, she said, because if they move forward with that strategy, we'll need to be ready. Within the next few days, the calm routine of my life shifted into something more structured. Danielle scheduled a series of meetings at her office. Legal paperwork replaced quiet afternoons. Conversations about financial protection became detailed planning sessions. This process isn't about proving they're wrong, Danielle explained during our second meeting. It's about proving that you are competent. The distinction mattered, because in court accusations alone rarely decide anything. Evidence does. The first step was medical documentation. Danielle referred me to a specialist she trusted in Portland, a clinical neuropsychologist named Dr. Alan Foster. His office felt very different from Danielle's legal suite. Bookshelves filled with medical texts lined the walls, and framed diplomas hung neatly above his desk. The evaluation itself lasted nearly 3 hours. Memory tests, reasoning exercises, problem-solving tasks. Dr. Foster asked questions about my daily routines, my financial habits, even my past teaching career. At the end of the session, he closed the file in front of him and smiled politely. Mrs. Hollister, he said, your cognitive performance is completely normal for someone your age. Normal is good, I replied. More than normal, actually. Your executive functioning and financial reasoning are both strong. In other words, there was no medical basis for questioning my judgment. Danielle added, Dr. Foster's evaluation to the growing file she was preparing. But medical evidence was only part of the picture. The financial records mattered just as much. We need to document the pattern, Danielle explained during another meeting. What pattern? The money transfers. She pulled up a spreadsheet on her computer screen. Rows of transactions filled the display. Dates, amounts, descriptions. Every transfer I had made to Olivia and Ethan's household over the past 18 months appeared in precise order. $220,000. When organized that way, the numbers told a story all by themselves. Courts don't like financial exploitation, Danielle said calmly, especially when it involves family pressure. I watched as she highlighted several of the larger transfers. The next step, she continued, is documentation from their side. You mean their accounts? Yes. And how do we get that with a subpoena? The word sounded heavier than I expected. A court order requiring them to provide financial records, Danielle explained. It allows us to see how the money was used. In other words, transparency. Within days, the legal requests were filed. Bank statements, credit records, property expenditures, everything connected to the Carter household finances during the period when the transfers had been made. The process felt strangely methodical. While Olivia and Ethan likely believed they were preparing a case against me, Danielle and her team were quietly assembling the full picture. Medical evaluation, financial documentation, legal filings, every step built the same argument, that my decisions were rational, and that the pattern of financial requests from my daughter's household was far from accidental. A week later, Danielle called with the update we had both expected. They've officially filed the petition, she said. For conservatorship, yes. The case had entered the court system, which means the judge has scheduled a hearing, Danielle continued. When 2 weeks. I looked out the kitchen window at the quiet Portland street where nothing appeared unusual. Neighbors walked their dogs. Cars passed slowly along the wet pavement. But somewhere inside the county courthouse, a file with my name on it now existed. And soon the truth about what had happened over the past 18 months would no longer be a private family matter. It would be examined in open court. The courtroom in Multnomah County Courthouse was quieter than I expected. Not silent courthouses are never completely silent, but the kind of controlled quiet that makes every small sound feel louder. Papers shifting on tables, shoes moving across polished floors, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I sat beside Danielle Brooks at the long wooden table reserved for our side. Across the aisle, Olivia and Ethan sat with their attorney. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Olivia looked confident at first, composed, as if the entire situation were simply another problem she expected to solve. But there was something tight in her expression, something uncertain. Behind us, a few observers had taken seats in the back row of the courtroom. Legal cases involving families sometimes attract quiet attention, especially when financial disputes are involved. Danielle leaned slightly toward me. "Just answer honestly," she said quietly. "That's all we need. I will." The judge entered a few minutes later. Judge Rebecca Lawson carried the calm authority of someone who had seen hundreds of cases pass through the same room. After the opening statements, the hearing began. Olivia's attorney spoke first. His argument followed the same narrative Olivia had hinted at during our phone call weeks earlier. "Mrs. Hollister has recently made several financial decisions that raise concern regarding her judgment," he said to the court. "Our clients believe a conservatorship would protect her assets and ensure responsible management." Protect her assets. The phrase sounded oddly familiar. Danielle stood when it was our turn to respond. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "we believe the evidence will show the exact opposite." The cross-examination began soon after. Olivia was called to the stand. For a moment, she looked almost confident as she took the seat. Her attorney asked the first questions, simple ones designed to establish the narrative. "How would you describe your relationship with your mother?" Close Olivia replied. "And in recent months, have you noticed changes in her behavior?" "Yes." "What kind of changes?" "She's become suspicious, withdrawn. She's making financial decisions that don't make sense." Danielle stood slowly. "May I proceed, Your Honor?" The judge nodded. Danielle approached the witness stand with a folder of documents in her hands. "Mrs. Carter," she began politely, "you mentioned unusual financial decisions. Let's discuss those." Olivia nodded cautiously. You're aware that your mother transferred funds to your household over the past 18 months? Yes. Do you know the total amount? Olivia hesitated. I'm not sure of the exact number. Danielle opened the folder. Would it surprise you to learn the amount totals $220,000? A ripple of quiet movement passed through the courtroom. Olivia shifted slightly in her chair. That sounds high, she said. Danielle placed a printed document on the evidence table. These are the bank records confirming the transfers. Olivia glanced toward her attorney, then back at Danielle. These were gifts, she said quickly. Gifts, Danielle repeated. Yes. No expectation of repayment. That was never discussed. Danielle paused. Then she asked the question that changed the direction of the entire hearing. Mrs. Carter, how much of that $220,000 have you repaid to your mother? The courtroom fell completely still. Olivia's lips parted slightly. Her eyes flickered toward Ethan, then back to Danielle. None, she said. The word hung in the air. Danielle continued calmly. And during that same period, did your household purchase a BMW X5? Olivia shifted again. Yes, and complete a luxury kitchen renovation that was an investment in the house. Using funds transferred by your mother, Olivia didn't answer immediately. Danielle allowed the silence to stretch. Finally, Olivia spoke. Some of it. Danielle nodded slightly. No further questions. The judge studied the documents for several minutes before speaking. Her expression remained neutral, but her voice carried quiet authority. After reviewing the medical evaluation, financial records, and testimony presented today, she said this court finds no evidence that Mrs. Hollister is incapable of managing her own affairs. Olivia's shoulders stiffened. Judge Lawson continued. The petition for conservatorship is denied. The gavel struck once against the bench. And just like that, the case was over. The courtroom emptied quickly after the judge's decision. Legal cases often end that way, not with dramatic scenes or raised voices, but with quiet movement as people gather their documents and walk back into the ordinary world outside. Danielle closed the folder on the table and gave me a small nod. It's finished, she said. Across the aisle, Olivia remained seated for a moment longer. Her attorney was speaking to her quietly, but she wasn't really listening. Her expression had lost the confidence she carried when the hearing began. Ethan stood beside her, staring at the stack of papers on the table. Neither of them looked in my direction. Eventually, they stood and walked toward the exit without saying a word. I didn't try to stop them. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon air felt crisp and unusually clear. For weeks, the situation had carried a kind of quiet tension that hung over every conversation, every decision. Now that tension had finally dissolved, but the aftermath unfolded slowly. Legal proceedings have a way of pulling things into the open. Within days, the financial records discussed in court began circulating among people connected to Ethan's professional circle. The documentation showed exactly how much money had moved into their household and how it had been used. The consequences came quickly. Ethan's firm, Northbridge Capital Partners, placed him on administrative leave while they reviewed the situation. Investment firms rely heavily on reputation, and public disputes involving personal finances rarely inspire confidence. Olivia's online presence, her lifestyle posts, the carefully curated images of their home and travel, began to draw quiet criticism once the court filings became public. But none of that was the part that stayed with me. The part that stayed with me arrived one evening about a month after the hearing. It came in the form of a letter, not an email. A handwritten letter inside a plain envelope. I recognized Olivia's handwriting immediately. For a long time, I simply held the envelope without opening it. Finally, I sat down at the kitchen table and unfolded the paper. The message was short. She didn't apologize in the dramatic way people sometimes expect. There were no long explanations or defenses, just a few simple sentences. Mom, I know things have gone too far. I should have handled everything differently. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I hope someday we can find a way to talk again. Olivia. I read the letter twice. Then I placed it carefully inside the same notebook where I had once written the word trust. Forgiveness, I had learned, doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it begins as nothing more than the willingness to leave a door slightly open. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to a quieter rhythm. I joined a local book club. I began taking longer walks through the park near my house. Some mornings I even found myself sketching again, something I hadn't done since my teaching days. The trust remained in place, protecting the financial future Thomas and I had built together. But the real change wasn't about money. It was about understanding something I had never fully realized before. Helping the people we love is a beautiful instinct, but love without boundaries can sometimes become something else entirely. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll take a moment to like the video, subscribe for more real family stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. I truly do read what people write, and sometimes those conversations matter more than we realize. Because many families quietly face moments like this, moments where love, trust, and self-respect become tangled together in ways that are difficult to untangle. And sometimes the hardest thing to learn is that protecting yourself does not mean you love your family any less. Late one afternoon not long ago, I heard the doorbell ring. When I opened the door, Lily was standing on the porch. She looked a little taller than the last time I had seen her. "Hi, Grandma," she said softly. Behind her, a car waited at the curb. But for the first time in a long while, the distance between us didn't feel quite as wide. And sometimes that small step forward is enough to begin again.